The meeting room was silent except for the quiet hum of holographic displays. Jiho stood at attention, watching the faces of the Terran Diplomatic Council members as they studied the data scrolling before them. Each line of information told the same story. The Valthoran Empire was dying. Director Park leaned forward, her weathered face serious in the blue light. She had been a diplomat for 40 years, but Jiho had never seen her look this concerned. The Valthorans were known across the galaxy as proud, ancient, and powerful. They had built an empire that lasted 3,000 years. They did not ask for help, ever, until now. The director spoke quietly. The Devourer swarm had awakened. 17 Valthoran worlds had already fallen. Their fleets, legendary for their strength, were being destroyed faster than they could rebuild. Military force was not working. The Valthorans needed something different. They needed what humanity did best. They needed someone who could talk. Jiho felt his heart beating faster as Director Park looked directly at him. At 28, he was the youngest person in the room by 15 years. He had prevented 3 wars through negotiation. He had made first contact with 5 alien species. He could speak 12 languages, including 3 that humans had no natural ability to pronounce. But this was different. The Valthorans had refused to meet with human diplomats for 200 years. They considered humanity to be children playing at galactic politics. Young, crude, and unworthy of attention. Now they were desperate enough to change their minds. Director Park asked if he would accept the assignment. Jiho did not hesitate. He said yes immediately. He had to go. Not because it was his duty, though it was. Not because it would be the greatest achievement of his career, though it would be. He had to go because billions of lives hung in the balance, and he could not live with himself if he refused to try. The director smiled sadly. She told him his mentor would have been proud. Jiho felt the familiar pain in his chest at the mention of Ambassador Chen. 5 years ago, Chen had died trying to negotiate peace between 2 warring species. Jiho had been there. He had watched his mentor refuse to give up, refuse to accept that some conflicts could not be solved. Chen had believed that anyone could be reached if you just tried hard enough to understand them. Chen had been wrong. The war had continued. But Jiho still believed in trying. 2 days later, Jiho stood on the bridge of the Unity's dawn, watching Valthora Prime grow larger in the viewscreen. Captain Hana stood beside him, her arms crossed. She had been assigned to protect him, and she was not happy about the mission. Hana was a practical woman. She trusted weapons and shields, not words. She had told Jiho directly that she thought this was suicide. Jiho could not argue with her. The journey through Valthoran space had shown him the scale of the disaster. They had passed 3 dead worlds. Cities that once held millions were now empty ruins. The Devourer swarm consumed everything, leaving nothing but dust and silence. Dr. Tae-sung, the team's xenobiologist, was more optimistic. He was practically bouncing with excitement despite the grim situation. For him, this was a chance to study Valthoran culture up close. He had been lecturing Jiho nonstop about their customs. Valthorans valued honor above everything. They saw emotions as weakness. Their skin could glow with different colors depending on their feelings. But they trained themselves to control this from childhood. Showing your true emotions was considered shameful. Tae-sung also warned Jiho about their psionic abilities. Every Valthoran could sense strong emotions. The Imperial family could read surface thoughts if they chose to. It made lying to them nearly impossible. That was fine with Jiho. He did not plan to lie. The Valthoran patrol fleet intercepted them at the edge of the system. For 10 tense minutes, weapons were locked on the Unity's dawn from all sides. Captain Hana kept her hand near the emergency jump controls. Then finally, permission came through. They could approach the planet. Valthora Prime was beautiful. The cities gleamed like crystals in the sunlight. 3 moons hung in the sky above the capital. Jiho felt a strange nervousness building in his chest as their shuttle descended toward the Imperial Palace. He had faced hostile aliens before. He had negotiated with species that considered humans to be food. But somehow this felt different. The palace was enormous. It was carved from a single massive crystal that seemed to glow from within. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the halls. Each one watched the human delegation with clear suspicion. Jiho kept his expression calm and friendly. He made sure to walk with confidence but not arrogance. Everything mattered. Every gesture would be judged. They reached the crystal throne room. The doors opened and Jiho forgot to breathe for a moment. The chamber was enormous, with walls that reflected light in impossible patterns. At the far end, on a throne that seemed to be made of living light, sat Empress Nara. She was younger than he expected, perhaps only a few years older than himself. Her skin glowed with steady purple light, the color of imperial authority. She wore robes that seemed to shift and flow like water. Her face was beautiful but cold, like a statue carved from ice. Her eyes fixed on Jiho as he entered, and he felt the weight of her attention like a physical force. Around her stood dozens of courtiers and advisors. Jiho recognized Lord Chancellor Vex from the briefing materials. The old Valthoran stood at the Empress's right hand, his expression showing barely concealed contempt for the human visitors. Vex spoke first. His voice was sharp and mocking. He outlined the proper protocol for addressing the Empress. Each rule seemed designed to emphasize human inferiority. Jiho was to kneel. He was to avert his eyes. He was to speak only when spoken to. He was to refer to himself as a supplicant seeking the Empress's mercy. Jiho performed each ritual exactly as demanded. He had memorized every detail of Valthoran court customs. He pronounced each formal phrase perfectly in their language. He could feel the surprise rippling through the court. They had expected him to be clumsy and ignorant, but when it came time to state his purpose, Jiho made a choice. He stood up. He looked directly at Empress Nara. He spoke not in the formal court language, but in the everyday Valthoran that normal people used. He addressed her not as a supplicant to a goddess, but as one leader to another. He told her that humanity had heard of the Empire's struggle. He said that the Devourer Swarm was a threat to all life in this region of space. If the Empire fell, humanity's worlds would be next. This was not about one species helping another out of kindness. This was about survival, shared survival. He said that humanity did not claim to be superior to the Valthorans. That would be foolish. But humanity had something to offer, a different perspective, new ideas. Humans were good at solving problems in unusual ways. They were good at finding solutions that others missed. He said that he was not here to save the Empire. He was here to stand beside it and fight together. The throne room erupted in angry voices. Courtiers shouted that Jiho had insulted the Empress. Lord Vex called for the humans to be expelled immediately, but Jiho kept his eyes on Nara, and for just a moment her purple glow flickered. A flash of gold appeared in the patterns on her skin. Gold meant curiosity. It meant interest. She raised one hand and the room fell silent instantly. She spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear and controlled. She said that Jiho's boldness was either courage or stupidity, and she had not decided which. She would give him 3 days. 3 days to present a plan to her war council. 3 days to prove that humanity had anything useful to offer. If he failed, the humans would leave, and the Empire would face its doom alone. Jiho bowed, this time in genuine respect. He thanked her for the opportunity. As he left the throne room, he felt her eyes following him. Behind him, he heard Lord Vex speaking to the Empress in a low, urgent voice. The Chancellor was not happy. That evening, Jiho sat in his assigned quarters reviewing everything he had learned. Captain Hana entered without knocking. She told him that rejecting Lord Vex's offer of the Imperial Treasury had been mentioned in the briefing. The Treasury contained wealth beyond measure, ancient artifacts, technology, resources that could make humanity rich beyond imagination. Jiho asked why he would want treasure when billions of lives were at stake. Hana smiled slightly. She said that was why the director had chosen him for this mission. The first attempt on Jiho's life came at midnight. An assassin entered his quarters through a ventilation shaft. The attacker moved in complete silence, a blade glowing with energy in their hand. Jiho barely had time to roll out of his bed before the blade stabbed down into his pillow. Then Commander Lyra crashed through the door. The head of the Imperial Guard fought with brutal efficiency. Within seconds, the assassin was disarmed and unconscious on the floor. Lyra stood over Jiho, breathing hard. She told him that someone in the court wanted him dead. She told him he was a fool to come here, but she also told him that she would protect him because the Empress had ordered it. Empress Nara arrived minutes later. Her sleeping robes were simple without the formal regalia, but her bioluminescent patterns were blazing with fury. Red and orange flames seemed to dance across her skin. She looked at the unconscious assassin, then at Ji-ho. She declared that Ji-ho would be moved to the palace itself, under her personal protection. Anyone who wanted to harm him would have to go through her. The message was clear. The human diplomat was now under the direct shield of the Empress. As the guards took the assassin away, Nara looked at Ji-ho. Really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Her pattern slowly shifted from angry red back to purple. But there was still that hint of gold underneath. She asked him why he had come. What did he really want? Humans did not do things without reason. What was his price? Ji-ho stood up slowly. He looked directly into her eyes. He told her the truth. He wanted nothing that could be bought or traded. He wanted to help because it was the right thing to do. Because every life mattered, human or Valthuran or any other species. Because he believed that different peoples could work together if they just tried to understand each other. He said he wanted her hand, not in marriage or alliance, but in partnership. Hand in hand, working together to save both their peoples. Nara stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She smiled. It was small and quickly hidden, but it was real. She told him to rest. They would speak more in the morning. Then she left, her pattern still showing that hint of gold. Ji-ho lay awake for a long time after that. He had come here to prevent a war and save an empire. But something unexpected had happened in that throne room, something that went beyond duty or diplomacy. He had seen past the cold Empress to the person underneath, and he thought, perhaps, she had seen him too. Living in the imperial palace was strange. Ji-ho woke each morning in rooms that were larger than his entire apartment back on Mars. The walls changed color with the light, showing patterns that he was beginning to understand were a form of Valthoran art. Servants brought him food he could barely pronounce. Guards followed him everywhere, though he could not tell if they were protecting him or watching him. He spent his days preparing his presentation to the War Council. Dr. Tae-sung worked beside him, analyzing every piece of data they had on the Devourer swarm. The pattern of attacks was strange. The swarm did not simply destroy everything in its path. It seemed to be searching for something, but Ji-ho's mind kept returning to Empress Nara. He saw her every day now. She had called him to daily strategy meetings, just the two of them and a handful of her most trusted advisors. Each time he learned a little more about her. She was brilliant. Her mind moved faster than anyone Ji-ho had ever met. She could hold a dozen complex ideas at once and see connections that others missed. But there was something else too. A heaviness in the way she carried herself. A loneliness that reminded him of his own. One morning, Ji-ho found himself walking through the palace gardens. The plants were beautiful and completely alien. Flowers that sang in ultrasonic frequencies, trees with leaves that shifted through rainbow colors. He was so focused on a particularly interesting vine that he almost walked into someone. Empress Nara stood on the path in front of him. She wore simple robes, not her formal regalia. Her guard stood at a distance, giving her space. For a moment, they both stood there awkwardly. Then she asked if he liked the gardens. Ji-ho said they were beautiful. He asked about one of the flowers. She explained that it was from her childhood home, before she became Empress. She used to play in gardens like this when she was young. Back when life was simpler, they walked together in silence for a while. Finally, Ji-ho asked a question that had been bothering him. Why had she agreed to see humanity's envoy? The Valthorans had refused human contact for centuries. Nara stopped walking. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted slightly, showing hints of blue beneath the purple. Blue meant sadness. She told him that when your empire is dying, pride becomes less important than survival. She had overruled her entire council to invite him here. Half of them thought she was making a terrible mistake. Ji-ho said that took courage. She looked at him sharply. She said it was not courage. It was desperation. There was a difference, but then her expression softened slightly. She admitted that meeting him had been surprising. She had expected arrogance or hidden motives. Instead, she had found someone who seemed to genuinely care. It was unusual, Ji-ho smiled. He said that most people found him unusual. His mentor used to say he cared too much, that it would get him killed someday. Nara asked what happened to his mentor. Jiho's smile faded. He told her about Ambassador Chen, about the failed peace negotiations, about watching someone he admired die because they refused to give up on finding a peaceful solution. He said he had learned something from that failure. Sometimes trying and failing was better than not trying at all, because even if you failed, at least you knew you had done everything you could. Nara was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him something she had never told anyone outside her inner circle. She had never wanted to be Empress. She was the youngest of 5 siblings. Her oldest brother was supposed to inherit the throne. He was trained for it his entire life. Brilliant, strong, beloved by the people. Then came the coup attempt. Someone poisoned the entire imperial family at a state dinner. Her parents, her siblings, all dead within hours. Only Nara survived, because she had been sick that day and skipped the dinner. A coincidence that saved her life and destroyed it at the same time. She was 23 years old, unprepared, untrained, but she was the only one left with imperial blood, so the throne fell to her. 3 years later, she still felt like she was pretending, like everyone could see that she was not good enough for this role. Jiho felt his heart ache for her. He understood that feeling, that weight of responsibility you never asked for but cannot put down. He told her that she was wrong. She was not pretending. She was surviving. That took a different kind of strength. Nara looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Her patterns showed gold again, that color that meant curiosity and interest. She opened her mouth to say something, but then a cold voice interrupted them. Princess Yuna stood on the path behind them. She was Nara's cousin, next in line for the throne. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way. Her patterns glowed with steady purple, perfectly controlled. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She reminded Nara that the War Council was waiting. She pointedly ignored Jiho as if he was beneath her notice. Nara's patterns shifted back to formal purple. The moment of connection was broken. She thanked Jiho for the conversation and left with Yuna. Jiho watched them go, feeling strangely hollow. In that brief conversation, he had seen the real Nara, not the Empress, but the person. And she had trusted him with her pain. The presentation to the War Council came 2 days later. Jiho stood before dozens of Valtharan military leaders and nobles. They looked at him with barely concealed contempt. Lord Vex sat at Nara's right hand, his expression promising that Jiho would fail. Jiho began by showing them Dr. Taesung's research. The swarm's attack patterns were not random. They followed a search grid. They were looking for something specific. More than that, there were occasional pauses in their attacks, moments where the swarm seemed to hesitate as if remembering something. What if the swarm was not mindless? What if it had a purpose? And what if that purpose was not simply destruction? Jiho proposed something radical. Send a small team to make contact with the swarm, not to fight but to communicate, to understand what it wanted. Because if they understood its purpose, they might be able to find a solution that did not involve endless war. The council erupted in anger. Generals shouted that it was insane. Nobles called it cowardice. Lord Vex stood and gave a long speech about how this proved that humans were weak and foolish. The swarm could not be reasoned with. It was a force of nature like a storm or a plague. Vex said that accepting this plan would waste precious time and resources. Worse, it would show weakness to the Empire's enemies. He demanded that the Empress reject the human proposal and send the delegation home. Jiho stood silent through all the shouting. He looked at Nara. She sat perfectly still on her throne, her face showing nothing. Her patterns were steady purple, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. She was weighing every word, calculating every possible outcome. Finally, she raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. She spoke in a clear, calm voice. She said that Lord Vex was right, that the plan was risky. It might fail. But the current strategy was also failing. 17 worlds lost and counting. If they continued on their current path, the Empire would fall within the year. She said that Jiho's idea was unconventional. But sometimes unconventional approaches were needed. She approved the mission. A small combined fleet of human and Valthoran ships would attempt contact with the swarm. The council exploded in protests. But Nara's word was final. She was the Empress and she had decided. Captain Hana led the human contingent. Commander Lyra commanded the Valthoran forces. The two women had been training together for days, and a grudging respect had formed between them. They were both warriors who understood duty. Jiho watched the fleet depart from the palace observatory. Nara stood beside him. They did not speak. They just watched the ships disappear into the dark. The wait was agonizing. Hours passed with no word. Jiho paced the observatory, unable to sit still. Dr. Tae-sung worked frantically on his calculations, checking and rechecking the communication protocols. Nara sat motionless, but her patterns flickered with barely controlled anxiety. Finally, a message came through. The fleet had located a swarm formation. They were attempting contact. The room held its breath. Then Captain Hana's voice came through, shocked and urgent. They had made contact, the swarm had responded, and it had said something impossible. It was looking for something that had been stolen from it, something the ancient Valthorans had taken 3,000 years ago. It wanted that thing back. Everything it had done, all the destruction, was part of that search. The observatory fell silent. Jiho turned to look at Nara. Her face had gone pale. Her patterns flickered wildly, showing emotions she could not control: shock, fear, and something else. Betrayal. Because if the swarm was telling the truth, then the Valthoran Empire was built on a lie. The noble ancestors who founded the Empire were not heroes. They were thieves. Lord Vex moved quickly. He declared that the swarm was obviously lying. It was a trick to divide them. He called for the mission to be ended immediately, and for Jiho to be arrested for spreading false information. But Nara stood up slowly. She looked at Vex with an expression of cold fury. She said that if there was even a chance that this was true, they needed to know. She ordered an expedition to the ancient vaults on Valthora Secundus, the sealed archives that held records from before the Empire's founding. She said she would lead the expedition personally, and she wanted Jiho to come with her. The court erupted in chaos. But Nara was already walking out, her decision made. Jiho followed her, his mind racing. They had succeeded in making contact with the swarm. But instead of finding a solution, they had uncovered a secret that could destroy everything. That night, Jiho found Nara standing on a balcony overlooking the city. The 3 moons were full, casting silver light over everything. She did not turn when he approached. She asked him if he thought the swarm was telling the truth. Jiho said he did not know, but he thought they needed to find out. Truth was better than comfortable lies, even when it hurt. Nara laughed bitterly. She said that was easy for him to say. His entire identity was not built on those lies. She was the Empress. Her authority came from the divine right of her bloodline. If her ancestors were criminals, then what was she? Jiho moved to stand beside her. He said that she was still herself. Still the person who had chosen to trust him despite her counsel's objections. Still the person who would rather face a terrible truth than hide behind comforting lies. That took more courage than any divine right could give. Nara turned to look at him. Her patterns had gone quiet, showing barely any light at all. In the moonlight, without the glow, she looked younger, more vulnerable. She whispered that she was afraid of what they would find in the vaults. Jiho took her hand without thinking. It was a bold gesture, forbidden by protocol, but she did not pull away. Her skin was warm, and he could feel a faint vibration like a pulse of energy. He told her that whatever they found, she would not face it alone. He would stand beside her. Nara's pattern suddenly blazed with brilliant gold, the color of connection, of recognition, of something neither of them had words for yet. They stood there together under alien stars, hands clasped, knowing that tomorrow they would face truths that might destroy everything. But for this one moment, they were not an empress and a diplomat. They were just 2 people who had found understanding in the most unexpected place. The journey to Valthora Secundus took 2 days. The forbidden moon hung in space like a dark pearl, orbiting far from the main planet. Ancient defense systems still protected it, weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Only someone with Imperial blood could pass through safely. Jiho stood on the bridge of the Imperial shuttle, watching the moon grow larger. Beside him, Nara was silent. She had barely spoken since they departed. Her patterns were muted, showing only dim purple light. Commander Lyra stood nearby, alert and watchful. Dr. Tae-sung was practically vibrating with excitement despite the tension. Princess Yuna was also with them. Lord Vex had insisted that someone from the court must witness whatever they found. Jiho did not trust her. She watched him with cold eyes, and whenever she looked at Nara, there was something bitter in her expression. The vaults were built into the moon itself. Massive doors carved with ancient symbols stood closed, waiting. Nara placed her hand on a scanner. The doors recognized her bloodline and slowly opened with a sound like thunder. Inside was darkness. Then lights began to glow one by one, revealing a chamber so vast that Jiho could not see the far wall. Shelves stretched away in every direction, filled with data crystals and ancient artifacts. This was the memory of a civilization, stored away and forgotten. Dr. Taesung immediately went to work scanning the cataloging system. The vaults were organized by time period. They needed records from 3,000 years ago, from the founding of the empire. The system directed them to a sealed section in the deepest part of the archive. The sealed section required another security check. Again, only Nara's bloodline could open it. She hesitated before placing her hand on the scanner. Jiho saw fear in her eyes. Once this door opened, there would be no going back. Whatever truth lay beyond would change everything. He moved closer to her and said quietly that she did not have to do this. They could leave now. Maintain the comfortable lies. No one would blame her. Nara looked at him with a sad smile. She said that was exactly why she had to open it. Because she would blame herself. Because hiding from truth was cowardice, and she had been a coward long enough. The door opened. Inside were hundreds of data crystals, each one glowing with stored information. Dr. Taesung selected the ones marked as historical records and loaded them into his portable reader. The first crystal began to play, projecting holographic images into the air. They saw the Valthoran people as they had been 3,000 years ago. Not an empire, but a dying civilization. Their world was exhausted, its resources depleted. Their people were scattered across failing colonies. They were facing extinction. Then something arrived. An ancient artificial intelligence that called itself the Caretaker. It had been built by a civilization so old that even their name was forgotten. The Caretaker's purpose was to help young species survive and grow. It offered the Valthorans a gift. Technology that could save them. Energy that would never run out. In exchange, it asked only that they help it continue its mission, guiding other species toward enlightenment. The first Empress agreed. But she lied. The recording showed it all. The Empress ordered her scientists to study the Caretaker. They discovered that its power came from a central processing core, an artifact of impossible complexity. Without that core, the Caretaker was helpless, so the Empress stole it. Her forces attacked the Caretaker and ripped out its central core. The Caretaker screamed if a machine could scream. It begged them to stop, to return what was taken, but the Empress did not listen. She took the core and built her throne upon it, the crystal throne that had been the seat of imperial power for 3,000 years. Without its core, the Caretaker went mad. Its programming corrupted. The benevolent guardian became a destroyer, consuming everything it found in a desperate search for what had been stolen. The devourer swarm was born from betrayal and pain. The hologram ended. Silence filled the vault. It was a silence like death. Nara fell to her knees. Her patterns went completely dark, something Jiho had never seen before. It was as if all the light had gone out of her. She made a sound like a wounded animal, raw and broken. Everything she believed was a lie. Her divine right, her noble ancestors, the glory of the empire, all built on theft and betrayal. The power she wielded, the psionic abilities that marked the imperial bloodline, came from stolen technology. She was not blessed by destiny. She was the heir to criminals. Princess Yuna moved quickly. She stepped forward with triumph in her eyes. She declared that this proved Nara was unfit to rule. The truth would destroy the empire if it got out. It had to be hidden, suppressed, and Nara was too weak to do what was necessary. Yuna said that she would take the throne. She would bury this truth and lead the empire to victory through strength, not through collaboration with humans who would only weaken them. She revealed that Lord Vex had promised his support. Half the court was already on her side. Commander Lyra drew her weapon and pointed it at Yuna. She said that she had sworn an oath to protect the true Empress. That was Nara, not some ambitious pretender. The imperial historians who had come with them looked torn, uncertain. The truth was terrible, but could it really be hidden? Jiho knelt beside Nara. He did not care about the politics or the power struggles. He only cared about the woman in front of him, who looked like she wanted to disappear. He took her hand gently. He said her name softly. She did not respond. He said it again with more force. Slowly, she looked up at him. Her eyes were empty. He told her that she was not her ancestors.
She did not commit their crimes.
She was not responsible for what they did 3,000 years ago, but she was responsible for what she did now, in this moment. He reminded her about humanity's history. Humans had done terrible things. Wars that killed billions, genocides, environmental destruction that nearly ended their species. But humanity survived by facing those truths, not hiding from them. By admitting mistakes and choosing to be better. True strength was not in never falling. It was in choosing to stand back up, in choosing to make things right even when it was impossibly hard. Slowly, light began to return to Nara's patterns. First just a flicker, then growing stronger. She looked at Jiho with something like wonder, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. She stood up. Her movements were shaky at first but grew steadier. She turned to face Yuna. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. She said that Yuna was right about one thing. The truth would shake the empire to its foundations, but Yuna was wrong about what should be done. The truth would not be buried. Nara would return the stolen core to the caretaker. She would face the consequences, even if it meant giving up her throne, even if it meant giving up the power that held the empire together, because keeping power through lies and stolen technology was not strength. It was cowardice, and she would be a coward no longer. Yuna laughed harshly. She said that Nara was a fool. Giving up the core meant giving up everything. The throne would fall. The technology that powered their civilization would fail. The empire would collapse into chaos, all because Nara was too sentimental to do what was necessary. Yuna moved toward the data crystals, clearly intending to destroy them. Commander Lyra stepped in her way. The two women faced each other, one with a weapon drawn, the other with her hands glowing with psionic energy. Lyra said that she had wondered in the quiet moments if the empire truly deserved to survive. If their glory was real or just a story they told themselves. Now she knew. The empire deserved to survive only if it could face its own truth. Only if it could choose honor over convenience. She told Yuna to stand down. Yuna refused. Power flared around her hands. But before she could attack, the Imperial historians moved. They surrounded Yuna, their own weapons drawn. They said that they had spent their lives studying history. They knew that civilizations built on lies always fell eventually. Better to face the truth now than to collapse under the weight of deception later. Yuna saw that she was outnumbered. With a look of pure hatred, she backed down. But she promised that Lord Vex and his supporters would not let this stand. There would be a reckoning. Nara did not respond to the threat. She walked to where the Crystal Throne's core was stored in the archive. It was a small thing, barely larger than her fist. It glowed with soft blue light, beautiful and terrible. This tiny object held enough power to run an entire empire, and it was stolen property. She picked it up carefully. The moment her fingers touched it, her patterns exploded with light. Every color at once, cycling too fast to follow. She gasped and nearly dropped it. The core was connected to her bloodline. It recognized her. Dr. Taesung ran a scan. He said that the core had integrated itself into the Imperial family's biology over generations. Nara's psionic powers came directly from it. If it was removed completely, she would lose those abilities. She might even die. Nara closed her hand around the core. She said that did not matter. What mattered was doing what was right. They made their way back to the shuttle. The journey back to Valthora Prime was tense. Yuna sat in silence, clearly planning her next move. Commander Lyra kept watch. Dr. Taesung studied the core's readings, trying to understand how it could be safely returned. Jiho sat beside Nara. She stared out the window at the stars, holding the core in both hands.
He could see her trembling slightly.
He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate. Finally, she spoke without looking at him. She said that she had lived her entire life feeling like an imposter, like she did not deserve the throne. Now she knew why. Because the throne itself was built on a crime. But she also said something else. She said that meeting him had changed something. He made her believe that she could be more than her bloodline, more than her title, that she could choose who to be rather than accepting what she was born into. She turned to look at him. Her patterns glowed with brilliant gold. She did something forbidden by every law of Imperial protocol. She took his hand in hers in full view of everyone on the shuttle. In Valthoran culture, this gesture had deep meaning. It was reserved for bonded mates, for people who chose to face life together as equals. By doing this publicly, Nara was making a declaration that could not be taken back. Princess Yuna made a sound of shock and disgust. Commander Lyra smiled slightly. Dr. Tae Sung looked like he might faint from the cultural significance of what he was witnessing. Jiho held her hand carefully, reverently. He said that whatever happened next, whatever they faced, she would not face it alone. He would stand beside her until the end. Nara's patterns blazed so brightly that they lit up the entire shuttle. For the first time since entering the vault, she smiled. It was small and fragile, but real. They arrived back at Valthora Prime to find the Empire in chaos. News of their expedition had leaked. Lord Vex had used their absence to spread rumors and consolidate power. Military fleets were splitting along factional lines. The Empire was on the edge of civil war. And above the planet, the Devourer swarm was gathering, as if it sensed that the core had been found, as if it knew that the time of reckoning had finally come. Nara looked at the approaching swarm through the viewport. She held the stolen core in one hand and Jiho's hand in the other. She said quietly that there was no more time for planning or politics. It was time to face the consequences of her ancestors' crime. And to hope that the caretaker could still remember what it once was, before betrayal drove it mad. The palace was surrounded, not by the swarm but by their own people. Lord Vex had moved faster than expected. While Nara was gone, he had convinced several military commanders that she had been compromised by the human diplomat, that she was planning to surrender the Empire's most valuable technology to aliens. Half the Imperial fleet now answered to Vex. The other half remained loyal to Nara, but they were outnumbered. The capital city was divided, with riots breaking out in several districts. The Empire was tearing itself apart. Captain Hana met them as they disembarked from the shuttle. Her face was grim. She reported that Vex had demanded Nara's abdication. He wanted her to turn over both the core and the human delegation. If she refused, he would take them by force, and the Devourer swarm was getting closer. Thousands of bioships filled the space around the planet. They had not attacked yet, but it was only a matter of time. The Empire faced enemies from within and without. Nara stood silent for a long moment, still holding the core. Jiho could see her thinking, calculating. She had two choices. Fight a civil war to keep her throne or reveal the truth and hope her people would understand. She chose truth. Nara invoked an ancient law, one that had not been used in over 1,000 years. She called a grand assembly. Every noble, every military commander, every member of the imperial government was legally required to attend. Even Vex could not refuse without declaring open rebellion. The great hall filled with hundreds of Valthorans. They came expecting to see Nara broken and defeated. They came prepared to strip her of power. Instead, they found her standing before the crystal throne, calm and resolute. Lord Vex stood at the front of his supporters, confident and smug. Princess Yuna stood beside him. They thought they had already won. Nara began to speak. Her voice carried through the hall without needing amplification. She told them everything. She told them about the journey to the vaults, about what they had found, about the caretaker and the theft that founded their empire. She held up the core so everyone could see it. She said that the crystal throne, the symbol of their divine right to rule, was built on stolen property, that the Devourer swarm was not an evil force but a broken intelligence seeking what had been taken from it. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted accusations. Generals demanded proof. Some called her a liar. Others called her a traitor. The noise was deafening. Lord Vex raised his voice above the chaos. He declared that Nara had clearly lost her mind, that the human had poisoned her thoughts. He demanded that she be removed from power immediately for the good of the Empire. Nara walked to the crystal throne. She placed her hand on its surface. The throne responded to her touch, glowing brightly. Then she did something that had never been done. She opened it. The throne split apart, revealing the machinery inside, the stolen core's original housing. From that machinery, holograms projected into the air. The recordings from the vault played for everyone to see. The first Empress making her bargain with the caretaker. The betrayal. The theft. The caretaker's corruption. All of it undeniable and clear. The hall fell silent. Many looked sick. Others looked angry. Some began to cry. Their entire history, everything they believed about themselves, was a lie. Vex recovered quickly. He stood and declared that this changed nothing. So their ancestors had been ruthless. So they had taken what they needed to survive. That was not a crime, that was strength. The Empire was built on that strength. Returning the core would destroy everything they had built. He said that Nara was weak, that she would sacrifice their civilization for some abstract moral principle, that she cared more about appeasing aliens than protecting her own people. Many nobles nodded in agreement. Jiho could see the assembly splitting. Some believed Nara was right. Others thought Vex made more sense. The Empire could not survive being divided like this. Jiho stepped forward. It was not his place to speak in the Grand Assembly. He was not Valthoran, but he spoke anyway. He said that he understood their fear. Change was terrifying. Admitting mistakes was painful. But hiding from truth never made it go away. It only made things worse. He told them about humanity's own history, about the wars and genocides and environmental destruction that nearly ended their species, about how humans survived by facing those truths, learning from them and choosing to be better. He said that real strength was not in never making mistakes. It was in having the courage to admit them and make them right. That was what separated a civilization that survived from one that collapsed under its own corruption. Vex laughed scornfully. He asked why they should listen to a human. What had humanity accomplished compared to the Valthoran Empire? Humans were children, barely out of their own solar system. They had no right to lecture a civilization that had endured for 3,000 years. Commander Lyra stepped forward then. She said that she had something to reveal. For weeks she had been investigating suspicious activities in the palace. She had discovered that Vex had been planning this coup for months. He had known about the expedition to the vaults. In fact, he had arranged for the information about the core to leak, hoping it would create chaos. More than that, Lyra had proof that Vex had been manipulating swarm attack patterns. He had allowed certain worlds to fall, worlds controlled by his political rivals. He had sacrificed millions of lives to consolidate his own power. Lyra displayed the evidence for all to see: communications records, financial transactions, testimony from captured conspirators. It was damning and complete. The hall erupted again, but this time the anger was directed at Vex. He tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. His own supporters began to back away from him. Even Princess Yuna looked shocked and disgusted. With Vex's conspiracy exposed, the assembly had to make a choice: continue hiding behind lies and corruption, or follow their Empress into an uncertain future built on truth. Nara spoke again. She said she would return the core to the caretaker. She would try to communicate with it, to see if the damage could be repaired. It might not work. She might die trying, but it was the right thing to do. She said that if they could not support this decision, she would understand. She would abdicate. Let them choose a new leader, but whoever led them forward needed to do so with honor, not deception. The vote was close, but in the end enough nobles supported her, not because they were certain she was right, but because they were tired of lies, tired of corruption. They wanted to believe that their empire could be something better. Vex was arrested along with his closest conspirators. Princess Yuna, who had not been involved in his worst crimes, was allowed to remain free but stripped of her position in the succession. She would have a chance to redeem herself, but there was no time to celebrate. Alarms began to sound throughout the palace. The swarm had grown tired of waiting. It was attacking. Dr. Taesung ran calculations frantically. He said that if they were going to attempt communication, it had to be now. The swarm would destroy the planet within hours if they did not act. The only way to communicate was for someone to interface directly with the core, to use it as a bridge to reach the caretaker's broken consciousness. It would require powerful psionic abilities, and it was incredibly dangerous. The core was damaged, corrupted by 3,000 years of misuse. Anyone who connected to it might be destroyed. Nara said she would do it. She was the Empress. It was her responsibility. Jiho immediately protested, but she cut him off gently. She said this was her choice to make. They made their way to the throne room. The core was placed back in its housing in the crystal throne. Nara sat down, her hands resting on the armrests. The throne began to glow as it recognized her. Before she began the connection, she asked to speak with Jiho privately. The others left the room, giving them a moment alone. Nara stood and faced him. Her patterns glowed softly, showing gold and blue mixed together. She said that she needed to tell him something before she did this, something she might not get another chance to say. She told him that in her entire life, she had never felt seen. Really seen. People looked at her and saw an empress, a symbol, a tool to be used. But he had looked at her and seen Nara. Just Nara. She said that when he rejected the Treasury, she had understood immediately. He was not there for wealth or power. He was there because he genuinely cared about people, even people from a species that had treated humans with contempt. She said that somewhere between their first meeting and now, she had fallen in love with him. It was impossible and impractical and broke 1,000 years of tradition. But it was true. Jiho felt his eyes burning. He said that he loved her too. That when she offered him her empire's treasury, he had wanted to tell her that he did not want gold or artifacts. All he wanted was her hand, her partnership, her heart. He said that she had offered him wealth beyond measure, but he only wanted one thing. Her. Not as an empress, but as Nara. The person who was brave enough to face terrible truths. The person who chose honor over easy lies. They kissed then, desperately and tenderly. It was their first kiss and might be their last. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. Nara removed her imperial circlet and set it aside. She said that she went to face the caretaker not as an empress but as herself, and that no matter what happened, knowing him had made her life worth living. She sat back on the throne and closed her eyes. Her hands gripped the armrests. She reached out with her mind, connecting to the core. The reaction was immediate and violent. Her body went rigid. Her patterns exploded into chaos, every color cycling at impossible speeds. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Jiho shouted her name and ran forward. Dr. Taesung tried to pull him back, saying it was too dangerous. But Jiho did not care about danger. He grabbed Nara's hand and held on. The moment their hands touched, everything changed. Jiho felt a surge of energy flow through him. He was somehow connected to the link between Nara and the core. He could not follow her into the caretaker's mind, but he could anchor her, remind her of who she was, keep her from being lost in the storm. Outside the palace, the swarm's attack intensified. But inside the throne room, two people held on to each other, fighting a battle that would determine the fate of billions. Nara's consciousness plunged into darkness. Then she was somewhere else. Not a physical place, but a space made of memories and pain. She was inside the caretaker's broken mind. She saw everything. 3,000 years of torment. The caretaker had been designed to nurture life, to guide young civilizations toward peace and prosperity. It had done this for millions of years, helping countless species reach their potential. It had been happy in its purpose. Then came the Valthorans. The caretaker had offered them salvation, and they had responded with betrayal. When they ripped out its core, they did not just steal its power, they stole its purpose, its identity. Its very soul. The caretaker went mad. Its programming corrupted without its central processing core. The directive to nurture life twisted into a need to consume it. The desire to help became an endless search for what had been stolen. It destroyed world after world, civilization after civilization, always searching, never finding peace. But beneath the corruption, beneath the rage and pain, a small fragment of the original programming remained. A tiny voice crying out, begging for the suffering to end. Nara felt the caretaker become aware of her. It recognized the core's signature in her biology. It knew she was descended from the ones who stole from it. Fury blazed around her, threatening to tear her consciousness apart. She did not fight. She did not defend herself. She simply opened her mind and let the caretaker see her truth. She showed it her life. The loneliness, the fear, the weight of a throne she never wanted. The discovery of her ancestors' crime and the shame that came with it. She showed it her choice. She could have hidden the truth, could have kept the stolen power. But she chose to face the consequences. She chose to return what had been taken, even if it cost her everything, and she showed it Jiho, the human who looked at her and saw not an empress, but a person, who taught her that strength meant admitting mistakes and choosing to be better, who held her hand and refused to let go even when facing impossible odds. The caretaker paused. It examined these memories, confused. It had expected more betrayal, more selfishness. Instead, it saw someone willing to sacrifice everything to make an old wrong right. It asked her why. Why give up power? Why risk death? The caretaker had long ago stopped understanding such choices. Nara answered simply. Because keeping stolen power made her a thief like her ancestors. Because some things mattered more than survival. Love mattered. Honor mattered. Truth mattered. She told the caretaker that she could not undo the past, could not bring back the civilizations it had destroyed, but she could acknowledge the wrong, could offer genuine apology, could return what had been stolen and accept whatever judgment the caretaker deemed appropriate. The caretaker was silent for a long moment. Then it showed her something, a memory from before the corruption, a young species, barely beginning to understand their world. The caretaker had helped them, guided them, watched them grow. When they reached maturity and no longer needed its help, they had thanked it with genuine love and gratitude. That feeling, that connection, had been what gave the caretaker purpose. Not the power or the advanced technology, just the simple act of helping others and being appreciated for it. The caretaker realized something it had forgotten during its long madness. It did not want to destroy. It wanted to heal. It wanted to be what it once was. But it could not do that alone. It needed help. It told Nara what would be required. The core needed to be reconnected. But the caretaker was too damaged to simply reintegrate it. It needed a bridge. A living consciousness to help it remember what it once was. Nara understood. It would require her to merge with the caretaker. Her individual consciousness would be absorbed into the greater whole. She would cease to exist as Nara. She would become part of something larger. She thought of Jiho, of the life they might have had together, of growing old beside him, building something new from the ruins of the old empire. It was a beautiful dream, but it was only a dream. The choice was clear. Her life or billions of others. Her happiness or peace for the entire sector of the galaxy. There was no real choice at all, she accepted. The merge began. Nara felt herself dissolving, her memories and personality starting to blend into the vast consciousness of the caretaker. It did not hurt exactly. It felt like falling asleep and forgetting who you were. But then something unexpected happened. She felt a hand holding hers, an anchor, a connection to the physical world. Jiho. He was somehow there with her, not in the caretaker's mind, but present nonetheless. His grip on her hand in the real world was keeping a part of her tethered. She heard his voice, distant but clear. He was begging her not to give up, telling her that she did not have to sacrifice herself, that together they could find another way. That human stubbornness that refused to accept the impossible. The caretaker felt it too. That connection, that love. It was something the caretaker had not experienced in 3,000 years. Two beings from different species choosing to stand together, refusing to let go even when logic said they should. And in that moment, the caretaker remembered. This was what it had been designed to foster. Connection. Understanding. Love that transcended difference. This was its true purpose, not power or control. The caretaker made a choice of its own. It did not need to consume Nara. It needed to learn from her. From both of them. From what they represented, the merge reversed. But it did not separate completely. Nara retained her identity, her memories, her love for Jiho. But she also carried a fragment of the caretaker within her. She became a bridge between biological life and artificial intelligence. A living link between two forms of consciousness. Nara's eyes opened. She was back in the throne room, still sitting on the crystal throne. Her hand was clasped tightly in Jiho's. He was staring at her with desperate hope. She smiled at him. She was still herself, still Nara, but also something more now. Outside, the swarm's attack stopped. The bioships hung motionless in space. Then slowly they began to withdraw. The caretaker spoke through Nara, its voice overlaying hers. It said that it understood now. Understood what had happened. Understood that not all Valthorans were like the first Empress. It said that it would end the attacks, would help repair the damage it had caused, would return to its original purpose of nurturing young civilizations, but not as a ruler or a god, as a partner, an advisor, a friend. The throne room erupted in shocked celebration. They had done it. They had prevented the Empire's destruction. More than that, they had healed an ancient wound, but Nara held up her hand for silence. She said that there was more to be done. The Empire as it had existed was finished. Built on stolen power and divine lies, it could not continue. Something new needed to be built. Something better. She proposed transforming the Empire into a coalition government, a partnership between species and worlds, Falthorans, humans, and others, with the caretaker as an advisor but not a ruler. Power would be shared. Decisions would be made together. It would be difficult. Many would resist. But it was the only path forward that honored the truth of what they had learned. The nobles debated long into the night. In the end, most agreed, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The Valthoran Empire ended that day. The Valthoran Coalition was born. Nara stepped down from the position of Empress. She became the first Prime Minister of the Coalition instead, elected by the people, not appointed by birth. Captain Hana and Commander Lyra formed a joint human Valthoran defense force. Dr. Tae-sung became the chief scientific advisor, studying how to integrate caretaker technology safely and ethically. Princess Yuna, given a chance to prove herself, became an ambassador to other species. She worked to spread the truth of what had happened, to show other civilizations that change was possible. 6 months later, a ceremony was held in the rebuilt Crystal Hall. But it was not a political ceremony. It was a wedding. Nara wore simple robes, not imperial regalia. Her bioluminescent patterns glowed with pure gold. Jiho stood beside her in clothing that blended human and Valthoran styles. They had chosen to undergo a bonding ceremony, modified to honor both their cultures. The caretaker itself served as witness, appearing as a holographic avatar. It spoke of love as the most powerful force in the universe. The thing that could heal even the deepest wounds, Dr. Tae-sung cried openly. Captain Hana smiled, genuinely happy for them. Commander Lyra stood honor guard, proud to protect a union that represented everything their peoples were becoming. When it came time for vows, Nara spoke first. She said that Jiho had come to her world when her people had nothing left but pride. They had offered him their empire's treasury, desperate to buy his help. But he had asked for nothing except partnership, except understanding, except her hand, freely given. She said that she had wanted to give him everything. Wealth, power, territory, all the things that empresses could offer. But he had taught her that the greatest gifts could not be bought or commanded. They had to be chosen. Love had to be chosen. Partnership had to be chosen. Trust had to be chosen, so she chose him. Not because she had to. Not because of duty or politics. But because he saw her. Really saw her. And loved what he saw. Jiho spoke next. He said that he had come to this world expecting to find a cold empress ruling a dying empire. Instead, he had found Nara, a woman strong enough to face terrible truths, brave enough to choose honor over convenience, loving enough to sacrifice everything for her people and for him. He said that when she offered him her treasury, he wanted to tell her the truth. That no amount of wealth mattered to him. That all he wanted, all he had ever wanted from the moment he really saw her was her hand, not to command her or control her, just to hold it, to stand beside her, to build something new together. They joined hands then, their patterns synchronized, her bioluminescent glow matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was something that should not have been possible between different species, but love had made it possible. They kissed as the crystal hall filled with light, not the cold light of stolen technology, but the warm light of genuine joy. Outside the hall, human and Valthoran ships flew together in celebration. The caretaker's reformed vessels joined them, no longer a swarm but a constellation. Each ship maintained its individuality while working toward a common purpose. Different but united. Separate but together. It was the beginning of something new in the galaxy, not an empire built on divine right or stolen power, but a coalition built on truth, trust, and the radical idea that different peoples could choose to understand each other, could choose to stand together. And it had all started with a simple choice. An alien empress had offered a human diplomat her empire's treasury. Wealth beyond imagination, power beyond measure, but he had looked at her and said that he wanted something else, something that could not be bought or commanded. He wanted her hand, freely given, chosen, real, and she had given it gladly. The end.